All right. Welcome to the Security Weekly News Wrap-Up, the first one of the year for the week of 3 January 2021. Show summaries, JetBrains, FBI warnings, some government news, and Bill Gates is about to take control of your brain and install Windows 3.0 beta on your medula oblongata on this wrap-up show for 2021.
This is Security Weekly. For security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. As technology continues to evolve and expand, so have the attackers that put our critical systems in jeopardy. Core Impact from Core Security is a penetration testing tool that safely finds vulnerabilities using the same techniques of adversaries, with certified exploits and wizards that guide you through critical pen tests while maximizing the time of advanced testers by automating their routines. With Core Security, you can safeguard your infrastructure by limiting access, detecting threats, testing for security weaknesses, and efficiently monitoring data. Visit securityweekly.com/core security. Do you know where your organization's crown jewel data is, whose data it is, what it contains, and if it's flagged, tagged, and classified accurately? Defense In-Depth requires Discovery In-Depth. At Big ID, they help organizations uncover dark data, classify sensitive and regulated data, meet compliance requirements, and take action for data on-prem, in the cloud, and everywhere in between. Learn more about how Discovery In-Depth can change the way enterprise organizations find, classify, and protect sensitive data at securityweekly.com/Big ID. Increased attacks, skill gaps, talent shortages, expanding attack surfaces. Cybersecurity and IT teams face these real issues every day. CyberA for Teams is the #1 NIST-aligned DoD 8140 and 8570 compliance certification and skills training platform. CyberA for Teams makes managing teams easier, guarantees measurable training outcomes, and keeps your team's skills sharp to meet today's biggest security threats. And did you know 96% of the Fortune 500 have employees training on CyberA? CyberA for Teams. Now you know. Visit cybera.it/solve to solve your team training challenges.
All right. I'm Doug White. Welcome to Security Weekly News Wrap-Up Show. Let's wrap up all the topics from this week. Got all the shows back in production after the Happy New Year, or not so Happy New Year. I don't know. It's hard to tell anymore. On Application Security Weekly number 135, John and Mike had two discussion segments on this week. First, they were talking about the term shift left and the concept of AppSec. This particular shift left they were talking about was about building secure apps by design. So getting that security, development in the process early on. And they did include a bunch of resources for doing this, like the OWASP Top 10 and so forth. So if you're in that space, it was a great segment to watch about what's going on there. In the second segment, they covered news, as often is the case. On Enterprise Security Weekly 212, Adrian, John, and Paul welcomed a new co-host, Tyler Shields, and they covered the news in the first segment on there. In the second segment, Chris Brown, the Senior Director of Data Security at Imperva, joined to talk about database security. So get your white books out if you're interested in all those fun topics. I don't know if they talk. Maybe they talk about normalization. I don't know, but get your white book out, your date book, whatever you call it. I always call it the white book, but a lot of people call it the date book. So whichever. On the third segment, so Sean Metcalf, the founder and CTO of Tremark, and Tyler Robinson of Security Weekly infamy, who is also the managing director of network operations at Nisos, were on board to talk about how defensive teams have gotten involved in these supply chain attacks that have been going on, and some best practices for Active Directory and Azure Federation. So always a fun time to listen to Tyler and company talk. On Business Security Weekly number 201, Paul, Jason, and Matt had on Todd Fitzgerald, the Vice President of Cybersecurity Strategy at Cybersecurity Collaborative. The topic was about introducing a new podcast called CISO Stories that Todd is doing. So if it was actually, I guess, live stories about the Wild West of CISOing. In the second segment, their news leadership segment, 6 board of directors security concerns every CISO should be prepared to address, 4 ways to improve the relationship between security and IT, 3 steps to break in a new boss for CISOs, and how to lead your high performers to excellence. Stop micromanaging and give people the help they really need. And also the top 10 in-demand cybersecurity skills for 2021. I'm always interested in that because, obviously we're training people up to go into that field, so we want to know what people are looking for. That's why I have a board made up of industry people, so they don't have to rely on dusty old academics to try to make those decisions. On the Security Weekly News number 91, Jason Wood returned to talk about how companies should stop using... wait, that's not right. What? That wasn't what he talked about. He was... I think I put the wrong text in there. Jason was on talking about how gaming and ransomware were being used by APT27. So that was what was on that this week. I'm not sure what happened there. Is this right as well? Sorry, I think I got some text in there that wasn't supposed to be there. On Security and Compliance Weekly, they did a look back. I got it straight now. They did a look back at the year from 2020 and all the great stories they did. It was their first year that they had been around. And in their second segment, they did a look forward to 2021 and Jeff made an exciting face on that show. So if you look at the piece there, the thumbnail, Jeff's actually making an excited face, which is a new and different kind of thing. And then I had an extra little piece of text in there. On Paul's Security Weekly numbers 679 last night, the first segment featured Clayton Fields and Michael Asraf, the vice president and the CEO co-founder of Vicarious, respectively. The first segment that they were doing was about how the analysis of vulnerabilities was built in reverse. So, and I completely agree with that, because SDLC came about before anybody really talked about security and all this kind of stuff, and so the analysis of vulnerabilities sort of followed that same path. They had some discussion about a new remediation strategy for vulnerabilities, so a pretty interesting segment for me, being in that space sometimes. In the second segment, Ming Chao, this particular segment was of real interest to me. Ming Chao, who's an associate teaching professor from Tufts University, joined to talk about what they are seeing from InfoSec graduates as they start their careers. There's a whole bunch of topics in this segment. Data privacy changes since 2014, the cloud, changes in the application architecture. A really interesting segment if you missed it last night. And of course, then they had, always fun news after that. My favorite thread of the week is going to have to be in the SDLC. So that good old boring software development lifecycle, which then translates into supply chain type attacks. But I was talking about SDLC in the Russian federal hack. So this is SolarWinds again. I know we talked about the Russia hack a lot before the new year, but new information made this sort of get to be a bigger threat for me. Apparently, according to this article that I put in there, JetBrains, which we're all pretty familiar with, the Czech Republic company, which is owned and managed by 3 Russian nationals, and is very well known. I mean, I have JetBrains PyCharm on my system, and you probably have some JetBrains compiler if you're doing any kind of app development. But it's a very well-respected, well-known application for development, basically the report says they're being investigated as potentially the root source of the Russian hack. So, according to this article, officials investigating JetBrains claim that JetBrains was possibly breached and used to insert the backdoors into all these networks, which would include SolarWinds. So, the build-out of SolarWinds came off of JetBrains. And this would then be kind of a supply chain attack. Right? So it's not just a supply chain, it's like the supply chain for the supply chain. And I hate to tell you this, but you're going to see this more and more. As the system development lifecycle has moved from that isolated mainframe world where there was an engineer sitting in a room somewhere writing mainframe code for use in that company, that's where I started, to a world where we have clouds, lambdas, APIs, paste bins, etc., all being melded together in a kind of festering vat of source code snips, GitHubs, and a really badass kind of algorithm some guy named Chet wrote and posted on Reddit. Well, that old SDLC starts to get a little dated, and it gets that kind of flappy flywheel look on code. And we've all used a tool we didn't understand. I assure you that. I mean, I managed to shoot a guitar neck through the back wall of my office one time because I really didn't know how a router, and not that kind of router, but this was like an actual router with like a whirling blade and all this stuff, and I didn't really know how it worked, but I was like, I'm going to try this, and I shot a guitar neck through the back wall of my building. My neighbor was quite interested in that when it came flying out of the building and landed in his yard. But all of us have now started embedding algorithms we didn't really understand into code that we were developing. I mean, I just recently did this with some chatbot stuff. I was putting it in, and I was like, I don't really know how this code works. It just supposedly does. And, we just assemble that code. It may involve too many source points. And it's really getting hard to fathom exactly what's going on with all the data points as well as the code points. So what do we do about vetting everything we build? I mean, we can't really go back to the old days and just say, okay, I'm going to build all my own code and nobody's going to see it and I'm going to keep it protected here in the mainframe room. So we kind of have to go forward. And even the hashes of downloads are not going to save you. I mean, I was talking to somebody about this the other day, and they were like, well, you got a hash. Did you check your hashes? I'm like, well, that doesn't matter if somebody compiled SolarWinds using, a JetBrains product, and that JetBrains product actually embedded the Trojan in the code before it was compiled. So the compile gets done, and then you've got the hash, and the hash, of course, is going to match. But that doesn't mean there's not a Trojan in there. So I think we're going to have to come up with a better testing/vetting process for new code before it goes into production, and maybe better isolation of this code that is running on our systems, because both those things are things that we need to do, but they're far easier said than done, by yours truly actually, saying, oh, we should do this, and then actually implementing it, because it's really challenging and you get under time pressure. I mean, think about how you would use JetBrains too, right? If you compiled a C program in JetBrains, and during that compile process, the compiler or the editor on the front end of the compiler actually reached out to the command and control server and embedded new code into the code as it was being compiled. I mean, that's, like, ouch. And so if you take it, you check the hashes, you validate it, and you use your code, which now can reach out and download even more code, that's going to be a tough thing to follow through the whole cycle. So in the meantime, I think we're going to have to test more. We're going to have to develop new code that uses other code and really dig into understanding all the places that the code can reach when it is running. So that means as you execute it, what is it doing? We're going to have to look at that. We're going to have to consider, how does it reach out into the internet before we ever dream about putting that into production? Because no one ever wants to hear that kind of recommendation, though, right? Because everything has to be out of the door by close of business today. I mean, at least that was my experience with it. So it's scary. Special topic in the news today. Don't forget, Joff Thyer is running his Enterprise Attacker Emulation and C2 Implant Development course on 19 January. So you may want to sign up for that. It's really priced right. And if you're interested in learning more about command and control servers that I was just talking about. So as a continuation of that SDLC stuff, here's another piece of the nightmare scenario, just as an example. And this was another story from this week. So in 2020, a Chrome extension, which claims to have over 2 million installs, which is called the Great Suspender, was sold by the original developer to some unknown person. And concerns began to be raised that maybe the new owner was modding the code maliciously. They don't even know who the owner is yet. So this is a pretty interesting article, though, that illustrates the difficulty with this sort of open world of software development that's currently going on. I mean, basically, you write the coolest app ever, like a chicken growing game. Millions of people download it and play it religiously. You sell it to me. I mod it and release the mod as an update. Voila, you got malware. I mean, I could embed that in it after the fact. I mean, how many people would hesitate to update a piece of software they're already using actively that's installed on their device, and they're using it right now, and it pops up and says update, update available. I mean, it's just another more sophisticated supply chain attack. I mean, I have to buy your product, so that that comes with it. But maybe I can do that pretty easily if I'm a nation state. I mean, if I just jump in there and say, okay, yeah, how much you want for it? $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, $5 million? I don't care. I mean, if I'm a nation state, I can afford to do that. And then once I take that over, who knows what I might do with it. NVIDIA warned that they were patching 16 CVEs in their graphics driver software, which included several high-severity flaws. The most severe one was CVE 2021-1051. It was an 8.4, and it was an issue in the kernel mode layer. Several of these other CVEs that were associated with this were also for kernel mode manipulation. And obviously that's a protected mode when it's operating. So if that driver is running in protected kernel mode, that means you can do an awful lot with it if you have access to it somehow. The very least of these threats was sort of a denial of service type attack. I guess against the local system, but it can also then be used to escalate privilege on that local system. So think about these NVIDIA cards and NVIDIA drivers. They're pretty much on a lot of end user desktops. So it's definitely time to update those video drivers in your shop. But you may need to start pressuring your home users as well, because if they're running NVIDIA on their desktop that they've got built now, and they may well be, they may be, the threat that's going to come in again as a sort of supply chain type attack coming through that home user desktop into your VPN, into your network. So, it's scary. The FBI issued warnings that swatting attacks were being conducted in conjunction with home security and streaming doorbells. No kidding. Basically, if you don't know what swatting is, it's a criminal offense. So if you're doing this kind of stuff, watch out. But it basically means calling 911 and getting the SWAT team to show up at your friend's house, thinking there's a mutant in a human skin mask running around with a chainsaw or something. So they tend to bring all the big guns. But now they've added sort of the gag ability to this, which is that they're going to stream this event occurring. So if they can compromise your security system or your Ring doorbell or whatever, and then they actually can watch as a swatting attack occurs and stream and live stream it. And then even some of this was even talking to and or playing pranks on the officers by talking to them through the security system and the doorbell. So, it is a kind of hacking thing. We all know that mentality, but this one's one that's very likely going to get somebody incarcerated. But if for no other reason than this, you may want to caution your home workers about their passwords on these kind of devices that they got for, Xmas or whatever. OSINT, multi-factor. Not a day goes by I don't see somebody posting one of those things on, Facebook or something saying, post your pet's name, your kid's birthday, and we'll give you, we'll tell you what kind of potato you are. But most of these devices are connected to the internet, and they will accept connections. So watch out, because there's a lot of threats coming from that. The FBI also issued warnings that EGregor, which is a very popular malware now, has compromised more than 150 organizations already this year. So according to warning, EGregor is the work of a large number of threat actors using a lot of different deployment approaches. And if you don't know, EGregor is a ransomware as a service platform, so it can take many different forms when it is running. But they have been targeting personal accounts. One of the most prevalent ones was targeting personal accounts and then using those personal accounts to move laterally into the business side of the business, because those same personal accounts are sitting on machines that are connected to business accounts on the other end of a VPN. The warning said to expect attacks using this ransomware as a service tool this year. And I will say again that you got to move on down that kill chain. Don't assume that 30-minute video about whaling. I had somebody ask me about this yesterday. Said they had to sit through a 30-minute video which explained all the grim details about whaling and why that was important. He was basically asking me, why is that important? And I was like, it isn't. It's just a term. And, I don't think these 30-minute videos are going to keep people from clicking these links. Maybe it'll keep you from clicking it, but it's not going to keep everybody from clicking it. And of course, people just flat out installing malware, and these supply chain type attacks are out there. So move on down that kill chain and start thinking about, how do I prevent this? The United States Army announced a bug bounty program this week called Hack the Army 3.0. As is always the case, I'm a huge fan of bug bounties because they encourage hacking in a legal and safe way that maybe actually gets you some cash, and it benefits whomever the bug bounty payer is. This is what a lot of us tried to do back in the 80s, and we got in trouble for doing it because we broke into a bank or something and called them, asking for a friend, and called them and said, did you realize that the password for your mainframe, system is TOOR? And they're like, why did you break into our system? And, and in the 90s, then they really started to press, for actually charging people with crimes for doing this stuff. Just for finding security flaws and letting someone know about it. And we've seen sort of resurgence of movement back towards how valuable that actually is to encourage people to do this and let us know about it. The program is being run by the Defense Digital Service, which is currently running programs for the DoD and has now run 14 public bug bounties in the past. In fact, they paid out $290,000 last year through the Hack the Air Force 4.0 program. DoD's been running bug bounty since about 2016, which is, that's like, wow, if only we'd thought about doing this, 20 years before. So get out there and earn, it's like, why not? Do it legally and have some fun. And Neuberger has been appointed by the U.S. President-elect Joe Biden to the National Security Counselor. And this is the first ever cybersecurity director sitting on the NSC. It's believed this is a move that's going to indicate that cybersecurity is being moved to the forefront as a priority at the top level. So the NSC, if you're unaware, is a group of advisors below the cabinet level. So it's not like the secretary of something, but they're below the cabinet level, and they directly brief the president on a specific area of interest. Because I got to speak to them one time, which was kind of cool. Politico said that Neuberger will be in charge of coordinating, listen to this charge, in charge of coordinating cybersecurity across all the federal government agencies and departments, starting with SolarWinds problem. Wow. I mean, that's daunting to me. I mean, to think I'm going to be in charge of all. Yeah, okay. I mean, obviously not her personally, but regardless. At the same time, the current U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo approved the creation of the Bureau of Cyberspace Security and Emerging Technology, which is called CSET. It's not clear at this time how CSET will interact with all the other agencies and all the cyber groups in the federal government currently, or if it will interact with them at all. In an audit last year, the State Department was accused of not involving other agencies in the creation of CSET and or consulting with any of the other various cyber groups being formed in the government. So imagine a world where the government agencies didn't hate each other and shared information, but it's really hard to imagine, especially at this point. And finally, well, we reached 2021, sort of. At least it adds up to a prime number, so that's kind of good. A joke which started in a Romanian chat room described a device that could be used to push 5G waves and activate nanobots in the Bill Gates-produced anti-COVID vaccines. Yeah, none of that is true, of course. A leaked circuit diagram for this creepy device spooked some people in Italy, and now the circuit diagram is being used to prove everything from the king of the world conspiracy theory to dark matter. And in fact, in the 5G conspiracy, and I really do love a good stupid conspiracy, and this one is one of the stupidest ones of all time. But basically, Bill Gates paid to have COVID, the virus, created in a Chinese lab, and somehow the virus contains some kind of nanoparticles that respond to 5G radio signals, and it's activated or delivered by this secret schematic for this device. And it sounds like the plot of like a 1970s Roger Moore Bond movie or something, where they've got this gadget and, Blofeld is putting them up on TV towers everywhere. But based on some events lately, I think people will literally believe anything that some guy named Chet, tells you while you're shooting pool in Ryan's bar in Bed-Stuy or something. But it turns out the schematic that is in this popular social media post is actually the schematic for a guitar effects pedal. So you can at least up your tone game when you're saving the world from 5G. And that's the news wrap-up for the week of 3 January 2021 in the time of plague. Please don't go for these stupid conspiracies, and at least go for the one where you send me all your money and worship at my shrine. That one I'm good with.